Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. My name is Kathy Posch. I'm a founding member of the Heart of Iowa Dems and the chair of the Iowa County Democrats. Thanks for joining us. It's nice to see so many return participants. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. We're recording this evening, as you just heard, and we'll post to the Heart of Iowa Dems Facebook page and YouTube in the next couple of days. You can also view a transcript of this by selecting live transcription on the toolbar. And if you want to throw out a question in the chat room, please do. If you already submitted one in advance, they already have that. So we will get to those and we'll get to as many in the chat room as we can. Also, feel free to drop in the chat room any suggestions you have for speakers, topics, anything for future Wednesdays. When I'm done speaking, I'll drop the Heart of Iowa Democrats email address into the chat room and you can communicate with us about anything you'd like. This evening, we're happy to host two Iowa legislators to give us a 2026 legislative preview of the session that starts next Monday, the 12th. Just a little bit about our guests, although I think most of you know quite a bit about them. Janice Weiner was born in Iowa City and raised in Coralville, has a degree from Princeton University and Stanford Law School. She then worked for 26 years in the United States Foreign Service. She has served Senate District 45 since 2023. That district covers most of Iowa City and University Heights. Janice was elected Senate Minority Leader in November 2024. Sean, don't tell me, Bagniewski. Did I get it? Thank you. Was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and raised in Des Moines. He holds a BA from Truman State University and a law degree from Drake University. He's represented House District 35 since 2023, which consists of parts of Northwest Des Moines. He's a member of the Appropriations, Commerce, Government Oversight, and Transportation Committees, and is currently a member of the House Leadership Team. Joining our guest as moderator is Laura Belin, another name I think you probably know pretty much through her blog called Bleeding Heartland or her Substack. She's followed Iowa politics closely since the 1980 caucuses. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, Laura. But take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate it. It's good to see so many people here. I'm going to start with there were quite a few questions submitted in advance. And so I'm going to just throw those to our legislative leaders. First one, we keep hearing about property taxes. What will be the impact of property tax cuts or limitations on local public school funding?
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here, and that seems to be the question of the hour, or property taxes rather, is the question of the hour. All I can say is I have not yet seen any of the versions of the property tax bills, or that our Republican colleagues are going to be putting forward. There are three. One from Senator Dawson in the Senate, which I believe will drop this coming Monday, one from the House, and one from the governor. But there are a variety of impacts that could happen on school funding. Perhaps one of the biggest is not from property taxes, but from what could happen or could not happen with school funding. If our colleagues do not raise school funding this year, we could keep seeing from people that they're not hearing.
I know, I'm trying to figure out what that is. And of course, we're missing our tech person tonight, the one night that we have a problem.
To figure out what it is.
We had some comments in the chat that some people are not.
I was just looking at that and trying to figure out what's going on. They should all be mute.
I can't figure out what's going on. I asked the participants to mute, but now someone is saying the sound is back, and Jan Norris is saying she can hear again, so we must be okay.
Well,
Okay, well, the question is like where to start. I would just say that if the goal is to lower property taxes, if school funding is not If school funding is not increased this year, we'll end up with the vast majority of Iowa school districts on budget guarantee, which means they can go back and end up getting property taxes raised to cover their costs. So I don't know which version of property tax bill we will end up with. We have our caucus has set basically certain red lines. If they're going to make changes, they have to be simple, and that has to make it more transparent. It's a very complex system. We have to be sure that we're looking at the full tax ecosystem, because every time you mess with one part of a system, it's sort of like whack-a-mole. You end up raising costs in another because there are certain things that must be funded. It has to help those who need it the most, lower income folks, people on a fixed income. And it has to not impede the ability of local government to provide basic services and public safety. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but those are the parameters, and I don't have a better answer for your question, Laura.
Do you have any thoughts to add on that?
No, I would agree with Senator Weiner. I think it's really strange to me that Republicans in both chambers are campaigning on property taxes and saying they're going to focus on property taxes. They've been in control of Iowa government, both the Senate, the Republican, the House, and the governor's office for 9 years now, and they haven't tackled property taxes yet. And I would think, with the session starting on Monday, that they would have some sort of a plan together. We haven't seen it on the House side. We haven't seen anything on the Senate side either. So we'll be waiting to see what they put together. For House Democrats, it's not just enough for us to kind of question our leadership. We're actually offering what we would do if we were in charge, and we would take a lot of the voucher money that they're spending, $1 billion over a couple of years now, and use the taxpayer relief fund for actual taxpayer relief and send that back as relief to taxpayers, to homeowners, to renters as well. And then to Janice's point, one of the biggest drivers for local expenses and local costs really are public safety benefits, and the state has moved those to local governments, by and large over the last couple of years, and we're advocating that the state should pick up some of the tab as well.
Senator Weiner, the House Democrats have offered their own property tax plan. Do you anticipate that Senate Democrats will introduce a bill on this as well?
I do not. As I said, we have our red lines. We will be watching very carefully, and we will be making very clear when those red lines are crossed. But at this point, we do not plan to offer our own bill.
And there were several questions that were related, that were covering a similar ground about how do you do this without creating more burden on the budgets of cities and counties in Iowa. And I think that is just going to be a really important part of the conversation. There was another question.
Could I add one thing real quickly, which is there's not a great track record, or there's not a lot of confidence in our Republican colleagues when it comes to covering costs, because after the commercial tax property bill of 2013, there was a backfill to cities and counties, which then was taken away. And while some were able to prepare for that, others were not. So in terms of trust, there's not a whole lot there in local communities and counties.
Yeah, I remember that 2013 grand bargain, and I think that backfill maybe lasted for about 4 or 5 years, and then it was gone. So that was a massive break for large businesses. I wanted to mention also that the rebate that the House Democrats have proposed as part of their property tax package would include a rebate for property owners, but also something for renters, because most of these property tax schemes don't do anything for the people who rent. So I wanted to mention that. I thought that was interesting. There was a question, what will Iowa legislators do to highlight the impact on everyday Iowans of federal cuts and weakening of many programs at the federal level?
So you want to jump in, or should I?
You can go first. I have a few ideas to add.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see it. Kim Reynolds finally felt the impact of SNAP and decided to accept the money, which she should have done several years ago. With Affordable Care Act premiums set to increase, I think they're going to double and triple in a lot of cases at the end of this month. I've heard from a lot of Iowans who are starting to see that. And I think that there's a misconception for Republican legislators at the federal level and at the state level that they think, if you have ACA health care, you're just poor people who they don't necessarily care about, or there's these awful stereotypes about the people who are on ACA. The people who are on ACA are farmers, they are small business owners, they are people who decided that they, had saved a lot of money and they decided to retire early. So they're relying on ACA to get them from 62 or 63 to 65. But there's a lot of people who are impacted by the ACA, and the subsidies are going to be going away. And I wish Democrats had held firm and actually held firm on the shutdown and tried to fight for the ACAs better than we did. But with these subsidies coming due, I think the Republicans know that they're in for a hell of a spin next month.
Yeah, I would add that one thing that I heard at one of the pre-session forums is an attempt by our Republican colleagues to say, well, the budget deficit we're in, the budget situation we're heading into is not all our fault. I'm paraphrasing. It is because of actions at the federal level. Well, guess who's in charge at the federal level? It's not us. And so whatever they planned for, it wasn't this. And Representative Bagniewski is right in terms of lots and lots of people are going to be impacted. I would add that I see two other things happening. One, the state is going to be asked to take on 75% of the administrative costs of SNAP going forward. We'll have to see how that works, because we must feed our people. We saw just how difficult that was when SNAP lapsed during the government shutdown. And the fact that while Iowans are very generous, you cannot make up that gap. It's just not enough. I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say for the other piece of it. Maybe it'll come back. But there are a lot of unintended consequences. Oh, I know what I was going to say. One of the other things I think that we're seeing in some of these letters coming out of the Iowa Medicaid director now, they are attempting to figure out how to do cost cutting, because we have a Medicaid deficit going into this. There will have to be a supplemental because we have a Medicaid deficit going into this session. They are trying to do cost cutting on the sly, and it's going to end up hurting Iowans and hurting kids in particular who can't get the services they need. So there's a lot that we're going to be spotlighting, but the federal cuts are going to compound the budget hole that our Republican colleagues have gotten us into.
And it's absolutely right. I mean, Medicaid is really where federal and state policy intersect. And if we all remember when Medicaid was privatized several years ago, we initially heard that it was going to save, I think, $900 million the first year. And then it was $500 million. And then it was, well, they're just going to be neutral for the budget and it's not going to go up anymore. And now we're actually spending more on Medicaid than we did before privatization. So for them to say that this is not their fault or Joe Biden's fault or Democrats' fault is just not true. Again, they've been in control for 9 years, for God's sake.
I wanted to just piggyback onto this question. Has anybody kept a running tab of how much the various entities in Iowa have lost? And I'm including like state universities from cuts. There were a lot of USDA grants that weren't followed through. There was that Doge situation where there was a lot of money already awarded. And does anyone have an accounting of that? Because Chuck Eisenhardt, former Iowa House member, he wrote something some months ago, like as far as he could tell, nobody in the state government, like in the Department of Management, is keeping track of how much federal funding that was supposed to come to Iowa last year didn't come to Iowa.
I'm not aware that anyone has. I may, after this, talk to Common Good Iowa and see if they have done any accounting on this.
Mm-hmm.
Side, they created a new subcommittee, a federal funding subcommittee, but that's looking for, I think, new federal opportunities, which are very few right now. I don't know that they've looked at any cuts, but I'll ask Representative Timmy Brown Powers, who's on there for House Dems.
Mm-hmm. There were a couple of questions people submitted about water quality. What is the legislature going to do anything about water quality this session?
Your guess is as good as mine. I would guess anybody is. The one thing I would say, and is that I think that the really serious nitrate issues from this past summer and discussions that have been ongoing for several years have really permeated people's consciousnesses all over the state. And it is now a topic that I personally hear everywhere I go. And I think that our Republican colleagues have gotten that message as well. The question is, what, if anything, they will do. They have a couple of options. Perhaps one of their easiest options would be to finally fund I will with 3/8 of a cent and use the remainder of that penny of sales tax to put some more money into the general fund. I had a really interesting conversation with one of the ag groups today, and they pointed out that there are many farmers who have signed up and would like to be able to put wetland areas back in their farms. But it's cost prohibitive for a farmer to do that alone. And the person who did it relied on a combination of some of his funds, state funds, and federal funds to do it. But the line is years long. People sign up, they say, well, maybe in 10 years we'll get to you. So there is a demand for that because wetlands do help clean water. Another thing that we could see is actually refunding all the water sensors, wouldn't necessarily clean anything up, but it would be helpful to know exactly where the problems are.
Yeah, I just add on top of the buffer strips. So Beth Wessel-Kushel is a Democratic leader on our side, offered a bill last year for buffer strips around a lot of the farm properties. We'll be offering that again for sure. Incentivizing cover crops. I've been talking a lot to Matt Russell on that topic. The testing for sure, just the monitors again in the water seems like a bare minimum that we shouldn't really have to argue about. And then really funding cancer research in the state of Iowa. To me, those four at the very least seem like they're pretty non-confrontational, pretty compromise-oriented proposals that you would hope Republicans could get on board with.
Right, and I saw a comment come in. We are filing bills. We are filing bills on buffers. We are filing bills to fund the water sensors. We are filing bills on all of this.
Are your caucuses in favor, if there is, I don't really expect this in an election year, but if there is a proposal to raise the sales tax, and of course 3/8 of a cent of that would go to this Water and Land Legacy Trust Fund to fund some conservation projects. Are your caucuses in favor of a sales tax increase?
I mean, we have not discussed it in our caucus. While we would really like to, while this should have been done like 15 years ago or 14 years ago or whenever it was passed by the voters. I think we would have to have that discussion, and my guess is we might be split.
I don't know for sure where we'd be on the House Dem side, just because to Janice's point, we haven't talked about it either, so I don't want to speak for my colleagues. I think this is somewhat different in that, we're very focused on affordability and cutting costs, but in this case, the voters already did approve this to some extent, so I think it's a little bit easier medicine to take. But, one thing I will highlight is with the special elections we've had, with the candidates we're recruiting around the state of Iowa, we're having a lot of town halls and forums. We're knocking a lot of doors. Affordability, cutting down costs is coming up on just about every door at this point, every town hall. So it's very real. So I think it's an argument we could make, but I also want to be cognizant that Iowans are really feeling a pinch like they haven't before. I'm talking too much, but Ken Judge is a good friend of mine, and he knocks about 50 doors a day. And I always ask him, what are you hearing on the doors? Because he doesn't talk to just Democrats, it's independents and Republicans. And he said he has never, since he's been in office, he's never heard people so sensitive to cost before. One guy said that every month he would put $1,000 away in his savings account. For the last year, they take $1,000 out every month. And when well-off folks are saying that, there's a pinch that's happening in the economy. So we're being as focused as we can on cost this year.
And kind of related to that, there was a question, what will be the Democratic response to cuts made in Medicaid and SNAP, the food assistance program?
Well, I'm not.
Since I can't read your cues very well, Janice, I know if you're jumping in or not.
No, I'm just trying to figure out. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Like, I think that we ought to make, will we succeed in doing this? No, but we ought to make everybody in the legislature live on what some of these people have every day. Yep. And with respect to all the additional requirements that have been slapped on, we ought to make them file for SNAP or file for Medicaid or file for unemployment before they could actually draw their legislative salary, so that they can see what the results are, or what the results are of what has been passed so far. I don't know how we're gonna end up backfilling some of these programs, because as I said earlier, as we saw during the government shutdown, the need is too massive for private charity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're on very firm ground opposing cuts to SNAP. I think people want to pay less in taxes. They want lower costs, but the public is broadly in favor of the SNAP program and not taking food away from hungry kids. So it's something that we can defend, no problem.
There were several questions about voting related issues. Do you anticipate the Republicans going after voting issues like more restrictions on absentee voting, or possibly repealing same-day voter registration in Iowa?
My sense is they're unlikely to do that this year. You may have a different sense, Sean. In fact, I've heard that there may be some bills filed with on the Senate side with Republican approval to somewhat extend the time for an absentee ballot, not actually for the ballot itself, but so they could be sent out a few days before early voting starts. And I also spoke with people in recent meetings. It's like they will fight getting rid of same-day voter registration. I would be surprised if they did that in an election year. Mm-hmm. Or if they did, it would not come into effect until the following year, because the general elections are the big elections for the auditors and for the Secretary of State. It's very difficult to make changes. The last time they did changes, they implemented it in the local election year part of the cycle.
Yeah, I was laughing a bit there, not at you, Janice, but just it's amazing that Republicans have kind of found the beauty in voting by mail and early voting. Yeah. And if you look, last year was the first time that I think more Republicans voted by mail than Democrats for the first time ever. And that really, hi, sweetheart, that really concerns me, because that's something that we used to do really well, is actually vote by mail, early vote. And Republicans pretended they didn't like it. They made it harder to do, and they didn't get rid of it. What they did is they made it so that only Republicans could do it. So they have an institutional advantage, they have volunteer advantages, they have money advantages. And by making it harder to vote by mail, harder to register, they put their operation behind doing that on the Republican side. And I think they finally discovered that they're winning a lot of elections because of early votes and voting by mail. And I hope we catch up again soon.
Go ahead.
I was going to say we caught up in Senate District 16 for sure.
100%. And the Zimmer race too. So what the Senate Democrats did on voting by mail and early voting is absolutely amazing. If we did that in every district this year, we could possibly win majorities, for God's sake. I'm very worried about what we're going to do statewide.
Yeah, the reason for that some Republicans, I think, want to send out or allow county auditors to send out those absentee ballots a few days earlier is that the window is so tight. And what's been happening, and I know I've heard this from county auditors, is that the early voting window starts, and then all these people who requested absentee ballots, they get very confused, where's my ballot? Or they try to come in and vote early in person, but they already requested a ballot by mail, and it creates a lot of logistical problems for the county auditors.
Indeed.
We're not talking about necessarily the reactivation and the registration, but I do want to touch on, it was unfortunately very smart what they did in 2021 when they did have the purges of the voter rolls. And I think we as Democrats were kind of slow to realize what was happening, but every time they were purging voters who didn't vote in the last election, the Iowa Republican Party was coming in quickly, identifying the Republicans knocked off the rolls, sending them absentee ballot requests, sending them voter registration forms, getting their folks rolled back on. So even though it hit them and us almost equally, they were the only ones re-registering all those folks. And what you've seen since 2021 to now in 2026 is there were 40,000 more registered Republicans back in 2021. As of tonight, there are 200,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in the state of Iowa. And it continues to get a little bit worse every time. And I don't know that we're paying as much attention to it as we need to.
Yep.
Laura,
It's
you've been
definitely
front and
something
center
I've
on it.
had my eye on, but yes, I would agree. Not enough attention paid to that issue. There was a question about voting record privacy. I think that this may allude to the deal that Brenna Bird and Paul Pate struck with the federal government, so that it was part of giving the state access to that federal SAVE database, but then also giving the federal government access to drivers' license information. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, my thoughts are that that's not exactly in line with what we've heard for many years about how our Republican colleagues care about privacy and individual rights. I'm not, I don't know that there. It's a concern, and I do not like it.
From the federal government, they were always very wary of a big federal government accessing state information and violating privacy. But when it's Papa Trump, they're not worried about it anymore.
That's for sure. There was a question here about how can we help you out this legislative session? Phone calls, emails, letters to the editor?
Yes.
What's most helpful?
I mean, the email, the thing that's probably the least helpful, I'll start with that, is these sort of automated emails that people sign on to, where we'll get, 100 emails on a certain topic, and they're all identical, and it's clear they all came through some service. Obviously, it didn't quite work, but really the most effective email campaign I've witnessed was when they went after the area education agencies. We got email after email after email of personal stories. They were all unique, and they were really helpful, and they clearly swayed votes. And I know that our colleagues got them too, and they were moved by them. So the emails on particular topics are really helpful. Showing up in person at the Capitol when people can to talk to their legislators and lobby is also really helpful. Letters to the editor and coming, and particularly turning up and turning out, and not just Democrats, everybody possible, turning up to legislative forums during the session is very helpful, because I want to hear what everybody is thinking and have a chance to converse with all of them. And those are great opportunities to talk about a whole variety of topics. And there are a variety of different kinds of forums, and people ought to show up and hold their legislators accountable. And that's a chance also to hold those accountable who fail to show up for these forums.
I would add to that. Help share the messages from the Iowa Senate Dems, the Iowa House Dems, volunteer with your local campaigns. I think this year we are going to have an amazing statewide ticket, amazing congressional races. Probably the best we've seen since 2018. So I think there's going to be a rising tide that lifts all boats with a lot of these campaigns. And if you have extra resources, extra volunteers to help the state house races as well, I think that helps both ways for sure. And then, I've been a big fan, and I've been touring the state trying to recruit candidates. And the best candidates we've been able to find for the Iowa House have been the people referred to us by the county chairs. So if you're a county chair, a county do-gooder, or a volunteer, and you have people we should be talking to, I would love to talk to them about running for the Iowa House. We've got 100 districts up this year, and we currently have 75 candidates in 75 districts, which is way ahead of schedule, but I'd like to get as close to 100 as we can by March, and we need a lot of help.
Our
I wanted
goal
to
is our goal is to make sure that we have 25 candidates running for the 25 Senate seats that are up.
I wanted to add that those personal stories about the area education agencies, I mean, it didn't stop all of the bills from passing, but if you look at what they passed, and I do think it was very harmful, but compared to what the governor
Right.
was initially proposing, that was scaled back considerably and is much less damaging than the original proposal. And I think that is because so many people shared their personal stories with the legislators.
I think that's true. The other thing I'd add is people, I mean, it doesn't have to be your own district. People signing up for our newsletters. I know that Sean writes a really good newsletter. I work really hard at writing my newsletter. You can get a lot of information, and because they, unfortunately, we just don't have the media ecosystem, the local media ecosystem, the local newspapers that we used to have. They can be a really helpful source of information for people across the state.
I wanted to add that Amy Adams of Progress Iowa wrote a guest piece for me a few months ago for Bleeding Heartland about letters to the editor, and it had very helpful advice for how to put together an effective letter to the editor that could actually get published. What to incorporate. They have to be brief, but how to make it impactful. And also, you may think, oh, who's reading local newspapers anymore? But I do think a lot of people read them. But besides that, you can take a screenshot or a picture of the letter to the editor and you can share that on your social media.
Correct.
And that reaches another huge audience aside from the people who are just subscribing to that paper.
Absolutely.
I wanted to throw in, I think we got through all of the prepared questions. I wanted to ask, do you anticipate any changes this year in terms of how many amendments Democrats are going to be offering on the floor of the House or Senate, to kind of put Republicans on record voting on some of your ideas? Obviously, you don't have control over what proposals get out of committee, but sometimes you can kind of get people on the record through offering amendments. And I was just wondering how you see that shaping up.
You can take this first if you want, Sean.
Yeah, I'll say I think the Iowa House Democrats under Brian, or whether it's under Jennifer or whoever, I think that we have made a point to offer, in some cases, dozens of amendments meant to trap Republicans on crappy votes that they don't want to take. Some have been more successful than others. I think the problem to the point we've talked about tonight is, not every Iowan can tune into the live feed of the Iowa legislature and actually see those crappy votes. So one thing that an idea we've stolen from the Senate Dems is there's the Senate Dems official page on the official actions from their senators. And then they also have a campaign page, which is the Iowa Senate Majority Fund page. And that's their candidates, but also kind of the hard contrast with Republicans when they do take those bad votes. So for the first time this year, in addition to the Iowa House Dems page, we have an Iowa House Victory Fund page. And if you're on there, you're going to see there's a lot more contrast, a lot more things that Republican legislators have been complaining to us about. But you're going to see those harder tactics over there. So as county leaders, as state leaders, if you can help us amplify that, please do. Hans Wills was really mad when we called out that he was on the Doge committee and was voting to get rid of Vipers. And he complains about it every time I see him, which, I can take that personally. That's fine. But just the fact that they're thinking about it, to me, means that it's working.
Yep, indeed. I mean, one of the other things that we will offer amendments. We will, in order indeed to get our point across, and to make them take votes on certain things. One of the other things that we will be looking at is also if or when, because there's generally when they bring culture war bills. I've challenged my members so that the very first thing out of their mouth if they get up to speak is, what Iowans really want us to be focusing on is the cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of childcare, the cost of groceries. And they are not interested in X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. That said, this is why this is a bad bill. But so that we can also, we can't take, when our people can't take photos of Republicans during debate, they can take photos of us. So sort of imagine a montage of all our members getting up and saying, what Iowans want us to be doing is X, not Y.
Anything to add on that?
I would say, we're going to be trying to steer away from the culture wars as well. Housing, energy costs, daycare costs. Right now, daycare, we were paying $1,700 a month for our 2-year-old to have daycare, which is a mortgage payment for a lot of folks. So costs are going to be front and center. But to Janice's point, we'll be ready to fight on the culture war issues as well. The one that I've heard the most about is the public library bill, where they didn't like that one person checked out, or one underage person checked out a book that had a sex scene in it. And again, going back to kind of our book ban debates, a lot of books have sex scenes in it. 1984, The Catcher in the Rye, The Grapes of Wrath. You go down the list of all these books. And right now, the House Republicans' proposal is that any of those books, including 1984 and The Catcher in the Rye, is going to be in like a naughty book section of every public library in the state, which we're all laughing at. It's absurd. And that's what we're going to talk about is, while Iowans are paying more for daycare, for their house, for energy, they're trying to put 1984 and The Catcher in the Rye in a nudie book section of your public library. What the hell are these people doing? They've been there for 9 years. Vote somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm practicing, guys. Thanks.
The libraries, I'll tell you, the librarians always show up in force whenever one of these bad library bills hits a subcommittee. So I always like to see them at the State House.
And they're on weird ground when it's public libraries. When it's a school library, and especially an elementary school library, that's a very different discussion. But the idea that you're going to have this naughty section for every public library in the state of Iowa is just too far for Republicans, for independents, for Democrats.
Wanted to ask, since last year, there have been changes in leadership in both sides. In the Senate, obviously, they have a new majority leader, and that means also a new leader of the Health and Human Services Committee. In the House, there's a chain reaction with 2 of the Republican members running for Congress, which means that there's not only a new House majority leader, but 10 committees have new leadership. And I was just hoping that each of you could talk a little bit about how you see the impact of that playing out, all those leadership changes.
Yeah, I think on the House committees, the interesting thing is that the House members running for the Senate or running for Congress, you can see the members they're most worried about are the people that they've been elevating into committee spots. So they're worried about David Young. David Young only won by 6 points last year. He's going to have a rough race this year. So all of a sudden he's the Commerce Chair. Carter Nordman is looking at a primary fight on his side. So now he's moved up, I think, in Ways and Means is where he is. So they're looking to kind of elevate the members that they're most worried about on their side. And then bringing Bobby Kaufman in place of Matt Winchittle is, kind of a wild card at this point. Bobby likes floor debate. He likes the fight. Brian Meyer and I like floor debate. We like the fight as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how things go next week.
So on the Senate side, in terms of committee assignments, I don't know if anybody has sort of gone through them with a fine-tooth comb as we have, but the new majority leader has decided to punish some of his members by taking them off of committees. In particular, I think one senator, Doug Campbell, is completely stripped of committees. Others who voted presumably either against the wishes of the leaders last year on the eminent domain debate have lost some committees, but not all of them. And we've heard a couple of complaints that it's making more work for the other members of the caucus. So we'll see how that goes. David Sayers is one of the folks who lost a committee. And he put up a Facebook post yesterday saying, guess what? Leadership, you may not realize this, but leadership doesn't assign committees based on merit or seniority or this or that. They can use it as a punishment. They can do it just because they like someone. Anyway, it's been interesting to watch that. The Senator Clemish was head of HHS. Now it's Senator Warmy. Senator Warmy has a reasonable background and has been decent to work with so far. I don't foresee a huge shift in in how HHS operates in the Senate. With respect to Senator Clemmer, she's a very different person than Senator Whitver. Senator Whitver is really a very political animal. Senator Clemmer comes from 20 years in local government and is much more of a policy person. And yes, he can get hot under the collar and so forth, but he so far has proven that to be someone who is willing to meet with us, which his predecessor was not. And so it remains to be seen. I mean, he's also talking to the press somewhat more. I don't think that my predecessors or I ever had a meeting really with Senator Whitver, and I have with Senator Clemish. So we'll see how things move forward, but it's a brave new world there. And we have a little.
You never had a meeting with Senator Whitver?
No.
That's amazing.
He didn't even answer my texts.
Wow.
What's been interesting to me is, we have so much scuttle at the Capitol on who's on what committee and who's in leadership, who's on the outs. And you never know, do average voters really know or care about this? And I follow every county Republican page in the state of Iowa. And what's been interesting to me is many of those county parties are talking about their senators who are not on committees or who are kind of being thrown out of leadership and thrown out of decisions, and how disenfranchising that feels to their counties on what's happening to their senators. So just kind of watching how they're arguing with each other is very interesting to me. I have not seen that in the last 20 years of the Iowa politics I've seen.
Wow. Yeah, I need to. I follow some of those pages, but I don't follow them as frequently as I should.
I want to follow the right county Republicans. It is 90 posts a day of awful.
That's hilarious.
I want to leave both of you some time. Any issues that weren't brought up in the questions that you would like to highlight?
I mean, we talked some about the state of the budget, but I think that in addition to really the affordability issue, which is going to be front and center for us throughout the session, the state of the budget is tremendously concerning. One of the things that we keep hearing is, well, they planned for this. They didn't actually plan for this. Because we got the projections last year. Senator Peterson did the equivalent of a FOIA request, got the projections for 4 or 5 years out, and those numbers are like half of what the deficit that we're seeing now. So they thought they were going to have to be digging into taxpayer relief funds, but not to the extent that they already are just 1 year in. You continue at this rate, we'll be completely out by 2030 at a minimum. So we are also going to continue to hammer on the need for responsible budgeting. You don't use one-time funds for ongoing expenses. And the fact that the governor has said, well, if you want to cut property taxes or if you want to continue cutting taxes, you may have to decide what services you want to go without. Well, does that mean that they're willing to get rid of, I don't know how many teachers? Does it mean that they're willing to get rid of fire or ambulance services in many counties across the state? Does it mean that they're maybe willing to get rid of the entire Department of Corrections? This is, we invest in people and we invest in our state and in our kids, and in our towns and cities, and that's how we would in theory at least attract and retain people coming to the state. We don't strip away things because for that imperative continuing to cut taxes. That kind of disinvestment is what we saw in Kansas, and we cannot continue it.
I agree more. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to add is just, if you looked at the budget last year, we overspent $900 million of the rainy day fund. This year, we're spending $1 billion of it. Next year is going to get even worse. And we've been calling it on the House Dem side the fiscal death spiral, and House Republicans got really, really angry that we were saying that, and they kind of denied that there was a death spiral going on. And now their new tack to what Janice said is, well, there is a death spiral, but they intended to do it, and all of these cuts were intended, and they're going to pay down the rainy day fund. And obviously, that's not true. If they were really planning this, you can look at the quarterly revenue estimating conference for the state of Iowa, and quarter after quarter now, for dozens of quarters, we keep on coming up short. And the reason we're coming up short is what Janice said, where, we were promised that they're going to cut all these taxes, they're going to cut the state of Iowa, they're going to cut everything down, and we're going to be this libertarian paradise where everybody's going to move to the state of Iowa, and housing is going to go, and energy prices are going to go down, costs are going to go down, and it's this libertarian dream. And, we're 9 years in now, and I can send you a list. Janice has been putting it out as well. There are 25, 30 rankings that are nonpartisan sources that, whether it's energy costs or people leaving or the brain drain after college or the number of hospitals or the water quality, we've gone down on every single measure. On just about everything other than we're low for some affordability costs, we're low for some housing costs for first-time starter homes, but everything else we're in the toilet. And again, if it's been divided government last year, if it's been divided government over the last decade, that might be different, but they've had complete control for 9 years now. They have nobody to blame but themselves. So that kind of ties in, I think, to the other thing that I'm watching, which is the lame duck status for Kim Reynolds. And the reason she's leaving, I would argue, is, she can see what's happening to the budget. The next 3-4 years are not going to be pleasant budget decisions, aren't going to be pleasant governing decisions. And she doesn't really have a lot of capital to spend. I don't think she wants to be here when the balloon pops, unfortunately. And kind of watching, she's had an iron grip on her Republican legislators. She primaried her own members. She was able to ram through the AEA defunding, the voucher bill, and everything else. And you can see that's starting to wear off this year. So seeing if she tries to push the pipeline again or some of the other unpopular things she wants to do, it's going to be amazing to see how they respond to that.
I see a couple of other questions in the chat. What relationship do the House and Senate Democrats have with the Iowa Democratic Party? I find it wild that the IDP doesn't understand the need to get people registered. It should be a priority.
I mean, we are part, our various campaign arms, our two campaign arms are part of the Iowa Democratic Party, the Senate Majority Fund and the newly renamed House Victory Fund. We speak regularly with Chair Hart and other members. But it is like my job as the head of the Senate Democrats, as the head of the Senate Majority Fund. My focus is on electing more Democratic senators. To the extent that we can register voters along the way, great. But what I've really appreciated is the local efforts that I've been able to be a part of in Johnson County, at the University of Iowa, other places like that, to get folks registered. I think there are some other efforts on university campuses. Part of the problem is we're a very heavily registered state to begin with. I'm not sure where all the other registrations come from, although I take Sean's point about the folks who fall off the voter rolls. Those should be the folks that we go after in a very systematic way. And I apologize, but I just apologize. Like, I've been sitting in my car in a Hy-Vee parking lot in Des Moines for all of this, if it looks a little odd, because I have to head home to Iowa City after this.
I mean, the question about how everybody relates together, Janice hit the nail on the head. The House Democrats, the Senate Democrats are there to run our chambers of the General Assembly when we're in office, and when we're in session. We're also responsible for recruiting candidates, for fundraising. We really rely on the state party to focus on turnout of the Democratic base, making sure everybody's registered, making sure everybody's activated, making sure that they're voting by mail. So I'm concerned about registration in the state. I'm concerned about reactivation in the state. I have the list. I'd love to share it with anybody who wants to work on it for their county. And I think the expectation should be that every Iowa Democrat should have an absentee ballot request mailed to them this fall. I think that's the only way that we can win a statewide race this year.
There was a question in the chat, with the AI boom, could there be a discussion regarding the significant use of water and electricity by data centers and the cost of those resources?
I mean, I would say yes. However, I do think that a lot of the, at least from what I heard about the data centers, and you may know more than I on this, Sean, in Polk County today, in one of the meetings I had, they said that when they had to pull down water usage this summer, the data centers in this area are actually using closed loop systems, so they are not huge users of water. But it is definitely in our one of the things that we're going to be paying attention to. We do not want residential power rates to go up. We want the big users to be paying their way on power.
I had two novel bills that I was going to propose this year. One was to crack down on private equity's ability to buy single-family housing and drive up the cost of houses. And if you saw the announcements today, Donald Trump announced the same thing. So he kind of took a lot of Democrats' thunder in the state of Iowa. But the other bill that you're going to be seeing on the House Democratic side is some safeguards on AI and how much they're consuming of our energy and how much they're consuming of the water usage. To Janice's point, I'm not convinced that the water turnoffs this spring in Des Moines had anything to do with the data centers, but the costs of energy for sure are being driven by the data centers. And, you can get into kind of utilities and rate making, and it gets really complicated really fast. But the easiest way to explain it is, for ratepayers, we are obligated to pay for any new infrastructure that they put on to meet increasing demand. And when the increasing demand is being solely driven by the data centers, to expect then, that we create new transmission lines, that we create new power plants, that we bring nuclear plants on just for those AI data centers, and then all of us as ratepayers have to pay more is bullshit. So what we're going to be looking at is what costs are being driven by the data centers, and how do we make sure that only the data centers are paying for that, not average ratepayers.
Yeah, I actually filed a bill last year on the private equity funds, hedge funds, having to do with housing, healthcare, nursing homes, daycares.
And I completely stole it from Abigail Spanberger. So the more that we can say this is a Democratic idea, don't let him take credit for this.
There was a question in the chat. Are you aware of the late January and early February public hearings to change Chapter 77 rules and regulations governing the threatened and endangered species lists of plants and animals in Iowa? Are your committees in the House and Senate prepared to understand the intricacies of these changes, especially when understanding the future effects of climate change, which we do not understand now? By removing species now and eliminating the special concern list, we may be removing species that are not affected now, but will be very negatively affected in the future. Any thoughts on that?
I was not aware of it. I will admit we will pay attention. We have folks on natural resources who are very tuned into these things on the Natural Resources Committee.
Heard either. Is that federal or state policy?
It looks like, I think this is a state, the rules. I think it's part of this whole redoing all of the administrative rules across state government and eliminating a lot of state rules. I wasn't familiar with this specific one either, but I think it's, my understanding is that it's part of that. Any closing thoughts? Kathy, should I throw it to you now?
Unless they each want to do a closing thought, but it sounds like they might have already done that.
I would interrupt with a closing thought.
Please.
We are fortunate in the state Senate to be going into this session having gained 2 members. I know that our House colleagues worked really hard in special elections as well, but we were fortunate to win all 3 of the ones that we contested last year. Just the last one was just over a week ago on December 30th. So that means we have a small amount of power this year, because if they want to get any gubernatorial nominations through, they will need at least one of our votes. So we will vet people carefully. We're not going to take every single person down, But we will be looking very carefully at the head of HHS, at the head of DAS, and at the two new members of the Board of Regents. We are going to be vetting folks extremely carefully.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I just want to thank all the people that are on here. I see lots of friendly faces and familiar names on here who are doing a lot of good work. I would say, the most important thing for me is the state house races, the state senate races, the congressional races, the statewide races. I think that this is going to be a year like 2018 where we do really well across the state. I think we're going to flip at least 2 congressional districts. What really keeps me up at night is, do we pick up some seats in the legislature? I think for sure. We've already heard that Iowa House Republicans are saying that they expect to lose 5 seats in the House caucus. I think that probably translates to that they're more worried than that, actually. They think that there's going to be more than 5. But what really, really worries me is, do we go to bed on election night and we came 30 votes away from winning Fort Madison or 30 votes away from winning Ottumwa? Those are the races that really keep me up at night. So the reason that we've got candidates on the doors right now today across the state of Iowa is we're having them door knock aggressively because we want to leave anything on the table. So the more that you can help our folks out in these districts, in these competitive purple and red districts, the better. I don't need your help in Des Moines and Beaverdale, but
Right.
I'm spending my time in Fort Madison, Ottumwa, Burlington. That's where we think this is going to happen.
And when you think of when you think of the sort of the money that goes into races, the human capital of the door knocking and so forth, but you look at what it takes to win a state legislative race. The three special elections we contested, we spent a total of approximately $250,000 to win 3. Like, who does that? We held a seat and gained 2 seats thanks for a relative song in political terms. So when what I would ask is that a rising tide lifts all boats. The ability to have local folks on the doors will help the statewide folks and the congressional folks. The ability to have good, well-funded gubernatorial candidates and Senate candidates and others will help the people down ballot. So I would just ask also that people think local as well, because we need our races not just knocked, but also funded, and we are a bargain.
There are a lot of donors that I've talked to in past years who say, well, of course we're helping the Iowa House Democrats. I gave money to Cindy Axne. I love Cindy Axne, but if you're giving money to federal candidates or if you're giving money to an opponent for Mitch McConnell in his home district, that doesn't do anything for Iowa Senate Democrats or Iowa House Democrats. So, please give to everybody for sure. But if you want the most bang for your buck, give it to one of our state House or state Senate candidates, because they can definitely stretch it much further than anybody else can.
Laura, did you have anything you wanted to add here at the end?
No, I don't think so. I think I got in all my extra questions. It's going to be a really interesting election year. Probably the most interesting I've ever covered.
Couldn't agree more. I want to thank Janice, Sean, and Laura for joining us this evening. That was a great conversation. A reminder, the recording will be up. If somebody couldn't come and they might like to see it, please forward it to them. I will send it to you, all of you, via email in the next couple of days. Next Heart of Iowa Forum will be on Wednesday, February 4th. Topic or guest to be determined. We'll close this evening. I'm going to encourage, since we were talking about donating, I get questions all the time like, I don't know what to donate to. Of course, my answer is donate to the Iowa County Democrats. But it's not a bad idea to donate to your county party, because they give money to your local candidates. They also give money to their congressional candidate, usually, if they have enough to do that, and frequently give money to the statewide race candidates too, depending on the size of the county. So please do that and volunteer your time as much as you can. I think everybody on the call knows that. So I'm just going to say good night from all of us, and thank you for keeping this series going. I really enjoy putting it together, and we'll see you soon. Let's elect some Democrats in 2026.
Thank you, Kathy, for inviting us. It's been a pleasure.